Manipur State Darbar was quite aware of that and were quite willing to join the Council of India. What was the structure, what would be the structures, and what would be the process was never discussed, but they have expressed the willingness to join Council of India. Between 1938 to 1940, the Darbar again considered to join proposed Federation of India. And then in 1947, April 30, Darbar of Manipur was willing to join India's Constituent Assembly. It was a time when freedom was found to be a seat and there was an attempt to form the Federation of India, or whatever the model it was. And a constitutional assembly was formed, and the Darbar was willing to join the Constituent Assembly. Then, on 14th May 1947, Manipur's king wrote a letter to Jawaharlal Nehru requesting that a separate representative for Manipur be sent and be allotted a separate state in the Constituent Assembly. This request was turned down by Nehru on 22nd, but at the same time, Manipur was compelled to send an indirect representative. So the Darbar on June 4, 1947 accepted indirect representations to the Constituent Assembly of India. In between, the Governor of Assam and the Manipur State Darbar signed an agreement on July 1st, 1947. I will not go into the details of the agreement, but the sense was that Manipur would be joining proposed formations of an Indian entity. That was the understanding in the agreement. Simultaneously, British had been trying to reform the administrative structures of Manipur for quite a long time. So, on the same day when the agreement was signed between Governor of Assam and the Manipur State Darbar, that's on 1st July 1947, rules for the administration of Manipur State was adopted. It abolished the Darbar, and the Council of Ministers nominated in consultation with the Governor of Assam was instituted to run the government, Manipur. Secondly, the next day, on 2nd July 1947, standstill agreement was signed between the Manipur government and the government of India. It was meant, dominant of India, it was meant to retain certain provisions of the conflict against whatever arrangement it was, certain provisions and certain clauses which were been continued by the British to be retained. So that was the sense of the standstill agreement. Then on July 14th, 1947, a person from Tripura called Girish Chandra Guha formally represented Manipur, Tripura, and Khasi states of the Constituent Assembly of India. In the meantime, Manipur constitution making was in the process. Series of meetings of Constituent Assemblies were held between March and May 1947. Finally, on July 26, 1947, Manipur State Constitution Act 1947 was adopted. It comes along with Manipur State Killed People's Administrative Regulations, Manipur Courts Act, and Manipur Naturalization Act. In that sense, it completely democratized the administrative and political arrangements of Manipur. Absolute monarchy has to come to an end, and people's democracy has to be established. Finally, there was a very big push by the government of India to incorporate Manipur into its proposed formations of an Indian entity. An instrument of accession was signed on August 8, 1947. It empowered, gave absolute powers to the Indian states, particularly on 4 areas. There was defense, the auxiliary and ancillaries, and communications, and transport, and etc. But that doesn't end in between the electoral process in Manipur was going on in full swing, and in 1948, Manipur state election rule was adopted. Finally, elections were held in June and July 1948, and Manipur State Assembly was inaugurated on this day, that is 18th October 1948, and there was big King's proclamation. As I said, let me briefly highlight the essence of the democracy that came into existence in 1948. We can see from it certain things where we can analyze. What was the political status of Manipur? when the assembly was inaugurated and democracy was established. There are different views. Some would say that Manipur was still a protectorate state under dominance of India. That was one line of argument. Argument. Another line of argument was that Manipur was still a sovereign entity within a bigger constitution called India. The another argument is that Manipur enjoyed limited autonomy within a centralized Indian identity. So the opinions, differing opinions continue to exist, but the historical trends as we could see, the acts and the process and the agreements and the adoptions of different laws entitled that despite Manipur enjoying a kind of autonomy, still there was an attempt to bring Manipur within a larger geo-territorial entity called India. Another essence of the democracy that we could see in 1948, the constitutions and the government that we formed was that the idea of territory was fully established. That Manipur's territory was defined and it was integrated and it was sown to it. Another point is the idea of people coming into existence, something that our focus is going to speak about. This idea of people shows that recognition of differences existing among different people and limited autonomy of tribes was fully expressed in the manner how the elections was conducted, in the manner how separate regulations was adopted. And the idea also of citizens also emerged quite interestingly, okay, giving them now constitutional protections of fundamental rights along with duties. And accommodations and absorptions of peoples were to be same, to be recognized as citizens, as to be found expressed in the Manipur Naturalization Act. Another aspect is like governance. What kind of system that the people at that point of time wish to have? And we could see that people were aspiring for representative democracy based on the franchise, something which was quite unknown and unpracticed in several parts of India and the South and Southeast Asian countries. And in this governance, separations of power between the executive and the judiciary was clearly laid out. Finally, on the questions of security, there was intent and intentions of and policies of policing and militarizing to the same. What we could see from this perspective was that democracy, however it may be perfect or imperfect, and occurred in a historical time, it was founded on the economic premise of a tribal society, semi-feudal society, and plus the evolutions of market capitalism evolving gradually and the big push by the neoliberal capitalist that's going on. But this dream of democracy is believed to have been settled after India's takeover of Manipur on 15th October 1949 and devaluing Manipur's status to a completely, abolishing the assembly and then bringing it in direct control of Chief Commissioner by the Manipur Administration Order 1949. How it happened, why it happened, what was the fallout is not here to be discussed, but rather we're grateful that the idea of people's have emerged and was fully exercised through the adult franchise, and Manipur was, despite all the policies of integration, was able to defend its territory and able to express itself as a separate entity either within India or outside India. That's the essence of democracy. And when we organize this program, some people think that it's going to be an anti-India program. No, it's not an anti-India program. And there, countries should be happy if they still consider Manipur to be a part of India, that we, in these eastern frontiers, happen to be one of the segments where the sense of democracy was fully acknowledged, understood, dreamed, and realized through the adult franchise exercise in 1948. I hope the parameters of this program is set within this framework, and I am hopeful that our key spokesperson will address this issue, the idea of Manipur, people's unity, the idea of territory, governance, and respect for human rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mandir. for throwing light on the historical background of Manipur and the journey of Manipur towards a democratic state. Next, we have Diamond Jubilee Lecture, We the People, a reflection on the trajectory of society and polity in Manipur by Dr. Angomcha Bimol Akoijam, Associate Professor, JNU Delhi. His area of specialization in social and political and cultural studies with specific interest in identity politics and conflict, nation state and minorities and gender relationships, popular culture, cinema and research methodology, politics of knowledge. Some of his significant publications include From Indica to Bharat via India, Manipur, How History Repeats Itself, Economic and Political Weekly. So, may I invite Professor Bimol Akoijam, sir, please.
First of all, greetings from my side, marking the historic moment today. Today is the 75th year. Diamond Jubilee celebration of the establishment of the first democratic elected legislature in entire South Asia. Some people say including Southeast Asia. There were other assembly elected through elections, but it was not based on universal adult franchise. The case of Manipur was the first in the entire South Asia as well as Southeast Asia, where the assembly was constituted through an election based on universal adult franchise. The election was conducted in June and July, and the assembly was inaugurated by Maharaja on the 18th of October 1948. Honorable Shri Rajendra Gautam, my friend, Speaker of Manipur Legislative Assembly, Shri I. Hemochandra, Dr. Malayan and Dr. Rajesh, and ladies and gentlemen. It's a privilege to share. Actually, I was supposed to be at home today in Manipur to be a part of this. There's a personal anecdote behind this event, and I'd like to share this. And I divide my lecture into four aspects or four parts. The first part I will call it the premise of today's lecture, and then the meaning of 18th October. What kind of meaning that should we have? And then I'll talk about the context of a subversive movement in history. And finally, I'll come to what brings the significance, particularly in relation to the contemporary time. In 2008, the 68th year of the Assembly was also the 58th year of Armed Forces Special Power Act, which was very contradictory or paradoxical, I believe. Celebration, the 68th year of celebration of democracy, was coincided with the 58th year of a very undemocratic, or rather anti-democratic piece of legislation, which I refer to as the legal fiction. Some of us organized it, perhaps for the first time, marking the 68th anniversary of the establishment of the Assembly in 1948. And I had this fortune of meeting in flesh and blood one of the leading member of that assembly then. I've interviewed him at the turn of the century. He was like a grandfather to me. He was just turning 90 years at that time when I interviewed him. His name is Mono Monsan. Is a member, is from the tribal community, as you call it. So I tracked him down, and he was still alive. And I invited him to be part of the meeting, which was held in Kanla Fort, 18th October 2008. I gave the keynote address to them. And later on, interesting, some political party have told me that they are trying to celebrate and they want me to be part of that former speaker, incidentally again. It caught up, then it became a regular feature. It was celebrated by a political party for a couple of years. I think then it fizzled out. Now, many CSO organizations have taken on this celebration. I, on my initiative, also tried to press the government to declare 18 October and celebrate it as a state holiday. I wrote an open piece as well in 2005 in Imphal Free Press, and the name of the article is called "Mr. Chief Minister, you got the date right, but not the month." It was a response to Sri Ibovi Singh's declaring 18 June as a state holiday, and expectedly some of the tribal bodies were up in arms and they blocked the highway for the first time, one of the longest blockade of the highway followed. So in response to that crisis, I wrote that piece in Imphal Free Press saying that the date is okay, 18 is okay, but you got the month wrong. Instead of 18 June, it should have been celebrated as 18th of October as a state holiday. There is a reason for this. I'll come to this later as well. Why is it? So that's the personal background to this event, how I'm attached to it and why this is important. In fact, some of us started a campaign in 2011 called People's Campaign for Research in Manipur. It was also launched on deliberately on 18th of October. This campaign was started. So the premise is to talk about what is the relationship between past, history, memory, and memorialization. This is the premise that we need to understand. What is the relationship between past, history, memory, and memorialization? And the second is the meaning of the 18th October, why it is important, what does it mean? And the third, which I'll be sharing, is how that moment was subverted. What was the context of that subversion? What are its consequences? And finally, and fourth aspect, I'll be talking about the significance of why we should remember 18 October. So the premise, what is the relationship between past, history, memory, and memorialization? Very quickly, this sounds very academic at one level. I think you will bear with me because I come from that tribe called the academics. So my language is bound to be a little different in that sense, but I don't believe that it is completely unintelligible to the masses as well. So past is a moment in time, as many historians will tell you, and history is a way of remembering and writing and discussing about that moment in time. So past is a moment in time, and history is a way of remembering and talking and writing about it. What is memory? Memory is also something to do with past, but unlike history, it is more or less seen as something that one has experienced oneself. So what is history for me may not be history for some. For example, say 1970s uprising and the kind of armed movement that we witnessed, the latter part of 70s and 80s is a part of my memory. But for my child, it is part of history. It's not going to be memory. So memory is something that one has directly encountered. Memorialization is, unlike history, it is not written and discussing but as such, but it is to commemorate, to remember and commemorate. So it has more to do with the present than the past. So that's a distinction people also make between history and memorialization. History is about past, whereas memorialization is more often than not to do with the present rather than the past. Why do we remember certain things? It has to do with the present rather than the past itself. Say, for example, we have Gandhi Diwas. It's not so much about that event, but why do we remember it? Because we want to instill a sense of patriotism and nationalist feeling. It has to do with itself. So that's memorialization has to do with the present rather than the past. But we have an interesting transaction between you and I as a person is fortunate in this manner. Various things where these past, memory, history, and memorialization sort of intersect. And this intersection of these four things must be something that, illuminating for you, even if it is a personal experience that I'm going to share with you. Before sharing this, I would like also to remember a well-known remark by George Bernard Shaw, who once said, "If history repeats itself, and the unexpected always happens, how incapable must men be of learning from experience?" And good. And that's very important, particularly for my society. We seem to be taken aback by what has happened recently, or what has been happening. And we start saying, they have planned everything, and so on and so forth. But if you really look at these issues, there are telling signs of what's been ailing the society, the state, is there. So I'm going to narrate about this in terms of two experiences that I had, which is where the past, present, and the future all get intersected. First is what I wrote on 22nd August 2015, that is 8 years ago, on my social media site. On my social media account, I wrote something, a series of posts that I wrote. You will remember July and August of 2015, in the same place, which is the epicenter of today's unfortunate event in Manipur. Churachampur was burning. They know, in response to a free legislation that the Manipur State Assembly adopted. In response to those three bills, there was a huge uprising in Churachampur and 9 people died in the process. It was in relation to that one, a series of my social media posts. I'm picking up one, which incidentally many people have said, you sound like, this is a remark said to me by a well-known activist politician from Arunachal Pradesh. He said, "Buddy, you knew it coming 8 years ago?" What she was saying is that it's if I have sensed that this is going to happen. What happened in May till today in 2023, it seemed that I have already forecasted that this might happen. And that is the post which I would like to share with you. This is what I wrote on my Facebook. To those who talk of coexistence and so years of history and civilizations, quite obviously referring to very familiar statement that may take off a link. The provocation that you might think is unbearable is just the tip of the iceberg. Get ready for the worst. It is a taste of your political maturity and strength. If one had been reading the development of the last few years, particularly the last decade, that means from 2005 onwards, that's the time when you have the super agreements crisis. So I said there on the 22nd August 2015 on my Facebook, and I said, if one had been reading the development over the last few years, particularly the last decade, you will see the episodes and the patterns and the context. Or that someone is for you to snap, the capacity to control and not respond, is to snap and create what some people wanted to happen. Once a conflict of that kind involving violence between communities happen, it sets up a new context and situation from which returning would be altogether a different challenge. And I continue to write, it is not easy to mend relations after a whole lot of rioting and displacement of population have taken place. And as that couplet goes, then I quote a very familiar Urdu couplet, and I say, Rahiman Dhaga Prem ka mat joro chitkaye, tutte se fir na jure, jure to kahan par jaye. Rahim says, do not break or snap the thread of love. Once it is broken, it will not join. Even if it joins, there will be a sign of a note. This is what I wrote on 22nd, 2015. Did I knew that something is going to happen in the future? The displacement of populations, communities, fighting. And this patient that those days I keep on hearing people say it is too much of a provocation. That's why I say what you are calling unbearable provocation then in 2015 was just the tip of the iceberg. That was my root. Is this memory or will it become part of history? That is what interestingly for academics to discuss. What is history? How do we know the past? How do we engage? I said for the last 10 years, then I was saying, if you have been observing and analyzing the episodes and the context and the developments for 10 years, which is hinting it from 2005, this is the year when the crisis happened about the soup. I remember 7th Battalion of Rifle was sent to More and so on, how these things was developed. And it culminated in 2008 as a formal agreement. Those developments, I was sitting in Delhi and not in touch with, within code, the ground reality. But how did I sense this thing? Is that what the historians or social science students do? What they do, does it have anything to do with the so-called reality on the ground? That's something that we must think. But that is what I wrote. That was one moment that we can raise a question about relationship between memory, which is of a personal kind, and historical things, and memorialization, and so on. But again, I said it before 2015, 2004 to 5, I have tried my best to make 18th Oct the state holiday. For reasons you will get to know in this lecture as well. Now, the second episode that I want to relate is I'm going to read it out, something that I wrote in an article as well about my encounter with Mr. Monomon San, who was turning 90 years. He was the only then surviving member of the Assembly of 1948. Perhaps I must be the only one who has a video recording of an interview with the living man of that assembly. I have still a small case, I hope I can do it. There are other things, but let's see. So I was writing my encounter. I still remember. It was the second or the third meeting when I was recording this. I remember how I looked, the crimson sky, the evening picture, the valley down, which I can see from this audio as I sit and talk to him, recording on the video. So I wrote, this is another thing that I wrote from one of my articles. Sitting in front of his house in the picturesque hill with the green valley down there at the distance and the blue sky promising to turn crimson in the horizon as a backdrop, late Enzi Monomon San took a journey back to a poignant moment in the history of the state. The outcome speaker Oire, Major Kathing say Aikoi party Niko, Man Hill Minister Oire. Aduga Arambam Kanatana Atei Maitai Karasu Minister Oibni, unquote. This is a line that I use in my first film for which I interviewed him. And translation goes what he said. This is a remarkable statement that I have ever heard. And as a student of social science, I try to decipher what does it mean, and I'll share with you today as well. He said, Diankam was the speaker, and Major Kathling was a member of our party. He was the minister in charge of hills, and there was some Arambam and some Maitis who were also ministers, and good. He started off when I asked about the Assembly of 1948. Mr. Monsang was responding to my query on that short-lived assembly. As these words came out as within quote traces of the past, this is a phrase used by historians, from the proverbial horse's mouth, I couldn't help but feel a surreal sense of encounter with history in flesh and blood. After all, it was a meeting with a man then turning 90 years of age, who was a member of the much talked about assembly, the first of its kind in this part of the world, constituted through an election based on the universal adult franchise under the Manipur Constitution Act of 1947. As I listened to him, my thoughts veered off to imagine, among others, a much younger Mr. Monsang, sitting amongst other members of that assembly, listening with the Maharaja's inaugural speech on 18 October 1948. And with his soft voice, almost coming to me as a reverberating echo from a bygone era, the wrinkles on his face were suffused with a past that lives in the present. Indeed, nothing registered this fact so profoundly than what he said next to me. He said, I quote again, Adu sakmai munna khangna engeda assembly do kai thobani fatara mathoi khat chatamna. Translation. But even before we get to know each other well, the assembly was dissolved after it reigned for 11 months on unquote. Just as in psychology, an analysis resistance would register on the analyst's free-floating attention during a psychoanalytical session, this remark struck me as I interviewed for my film called Langui Chandravi, which was released in Mumbai World Social Forum in 2004. In fact, like what happened when an ethnographer goes through his or her field notes, or a clinician reflects on the notes taken during a therapeutic or counseling session, the full significance of this remark began to get unfolded in all its richness as I went through the rushes, the recordings of the interview on the editing table. As his words, before we got to know each other, assembly, literally meaning it was broken, means 11 months, began to acquire meanings and significance to understand the ill effects of that moment in the body politics of Manipur today. Particularly the split psyche of a fragmented self and the inability to function with the sense and sensibility of modern ethos and democratic norms. This is what I sense. It's very significant when he says, even we didn't get to know each other, the members. The assembly was broken. The metaphor and the implication, that richness of this moment is what I shall share in the section on the subversive. So what was 18? Why it is so important for us? And what does that mean is something that I would like to discuss with you in the second segment of my lecture. 18th October was the day when the representatives of the people of Manipur, irrespective of communities, language, religion, sex, place of residence, etc., came together to mark their transformation from being mere subjects, within quote, subjects who normally don't have the right as citizens, as from being the subjects of a sovereign king to that of becoming a democratic citizens who share the sovereign power with the king. In other words, that they mark a moment wherein from being a subject without civil and political rights fully, the individual members that came under the expression, the people of Manipur, became the right-bearing citizens who as individuals are equal in the eyes of the land of the Lord. You must remember this is the three-letter words, fraternity, equality, and liberty, the slogan of the liberal ethos, which was aptly expressed in the French Revolution, especially in its declaration of the rights of men and citizens. You will see this in French Revolution, so that everybody is equal and they are right-bearing. That's the foundation of modern democracy and the concept of we the people. So that sense of an individual and individual coming together, even if you look in political science theory, for example, well-known work by Thomas Sowell, Leviathan, for example, how the we the people has been created. But these right-bearing people come together to form a community, and that's how we the people in modern liberal sense is. And this is what the political sociologist Michael Mann said, the stratified conception of people. So people may be different, you may belong to different religion, culture, and so on, but everybody has the same dignity and the right, and they come together to form a community, to look for and work together for a common good. That's the principle of liberal self. That is the significance which was opened or inaugurated in Manipur on the 18th of October 1948. To think of it, it is not only the transformation of the individuals, but the collective as well. It was also the beginning and the recognition of the assertion of what we call in political science popular sovereignty in Manipur. Because you can remember that in French Revolution's Declaration of Men and Citizens, Rights of the Men and Citizens, the Article 3 says that the sovereignty rests with the people, with the nation. Otherwise, earlier, sovereignty was rests with the king. Even you can see in Treaty of Yandapo, for example, when you talk about the Asiatic sovereign, he was referring to the Raja, the king. So he was a sovereign. You must recognize him as a sovereign. So the sovereign rests with the body of the king. In modern democracy, that sovereignty is located in the body of the collective, which is formed by the citizens. So that's what we call it popular sovereignty. So it was the inauguration of the popular sovereignty. And democratic ethos. Truly, it was a moment for Manipur as a state to consolidate the transition from being, to borrow from French thinker Michel Foucault, from a territorial state to being a population state in some sense as well. In this sense, it was truly an epoch-making historical moment of imagining a new collective in modern terms, rather than the old ethos. So it's a modern thinking and the collective being imagined as the people of Manipur. It is the day that captures the trajectory of the different forms of consciousness of collectivities and relationships that have presumably accompanied the transformation of a space dotted by small human settlements, villages, principalities to a kingdom, and then to a monarchic state, and to becoming a modern state which gets its legitimacy from none other than the idea of we, the people, a collective defined by the right-bearing citizens. You must know what I was just saying in this line is that if you imagine the emergence of the evolution of Manipur, you see that when the Himalayan ranges were formed 50 million years ago, with the collision of these geological plates and how Himalayan came up, Manipur is part of that one. So you have these hills and valleys. It is through that ecology you can see that normally the state and civilization opens up, whereas the many social science and historians will remind us, where you have surplus food and population growth. So when you have this valley is where you have many collectivities like these small within quote states, villages, village. Many of them, they come together as a kingdom and a monarchic state to a modern state. That is the moment of October 1948, the evolution of the Manipur state. In other words, what does it also mean is the consciousness and cosmologies of the people under the social order of kinship group, like Lekais and Kul, insulated and often fortified villages. You can see that in tribal villages how it was fortified. Under the chiefs and the sovereignty of the sovereign monarch, are bound to be different from that of the social order and secularized political space inhabited by enfranchised people in a modern state. It's very different from the kinship to a modern democratic sense. That's also a shift in the consciousness of society as well. For example, the way you look at the other communities or the women, for example, will change because this is a liberal democracy. Everybody is equal, whether you are a woman or a man or the tribal or a non-tribal or a speaker of that language or this language or residing in certain areas or not. Everybody is considered to be, legally speaking, treated as equal in the eyes of the law. So you can sense that, therefore, the nature of the hierarchy of loyalty that people have, think about it today as well, is supposed to change. How it is supposed to change? But think of this one. So Manipur as an integrated whole marked by a hierarchy of loyalty with the king at the top and his officers, and the village chiefs and Sagai Ahals below cannot be the same under a democratic and republican order inhabited by equal, at least in principle, individual citizens. That's a form of loyalty, but we might still find that we still have a notion of a king. We used to get mapi, mapa, and angam matao, Our mind is still in that form. It completely is not modern in our sense and sensibility. But nonetheless, it is there among us, and it was inaugurated. It is no longer the same as the old times. So that is a significance. So you can see what 18th October means. So in short, what it means is not simply the formation of an assembly, but it is the shift in the notion of sovereign power from the sovereign king, the sovereignty resting with the king, to the sovereignty rest with the people. Along with that, the notion of everybody as a right-bearing member, and as a community is a collection of these right-bearing citizens who willfully come together to form the community, to find a common good, and then create a justice for everybody. And second, it also accompanied with certain societal changes. You have the king, then there is ministers in the konu or the palace, then the village chiefs, and the sagai ahals, and that hierarchy, the patriarch in the family. That kind of a societal order is changed because everybody is equal in other words. In the Max Weber sense, it is truly a modern if you really see it. For example, in the feudal monarchical order, in the impersonal state, all the properties, the means of administration belong to the king. So the weapons, the horses, the elephants, everything is owned by the king. When the king is destroyed, the kingdom goes. But unlike that, as Weber reminds us, there is a separation between the material means of administration and the administrator. So today, the prime minister, the chief minister is using material like the car and the jeeps and the money and all of them. It's not the personal property of these people. So there is a separation between the material means of administration and administrator. So that is what the democracy would mean. In fact, if you read the speech by Maharaja Bodhichandra, which is available both in English and in Meitei, you can take a little liberty to translate yourself as well to compare these two texts. It might be helpful. He says that I am no longer the person with that sovereign power. I have handed over to in fact, he says, much before this assembly, people did not know that I have already handed over my power to the council. He said it on the floor of the house as he inaugurates that assembly. And this is the same argument that the Maharaja will be putting forth towards the Indian officers who detained him in Shillong in 1949 from September 18 to 21. And he said that I can't sign this merger agreement because I am only a constitutional monarch. I don't have the power. Let me go back to Imphal and consult my government and the assembly. And even he says that they might be willing to do this, but let me go back. There is a dictum given that he should not be allowed to go to Imphal before signing this merger agreement and so on. That's the history part of that. I'll get back to it when I come to discuss in a little bit. So you can see that there's a shift in the notion of sovereignty and our loyalty and the value and belief system of the society. So it is a marked moment moving towards more progressive, right-based discourses to define our life and what is good and what is bad. So the third section is the context. What was that assembly would mean? And today we are part of the Republic of India, and we need to understand there's a two contexts to this one. And this is the third segment that I am speaking of my lecture. You must know this one. There's a context which I'll again split into two parts. One is an external context and there is an internal context to this situation. What would say? The external context, you need to know a little bit about how the politics were turning in South Asia and Southeast Asia. Then you will get to sense where Manipur is located and how that dynamics. To remember first, Manipur has been an old kingdom, everybody knows. With the power at Kangla become powerful and he subjugated lots of other villages, we expanded. It reigned, his influences reigned all the way to the Myanmar, contemporary Myanmar. To this side, we go to the Sylhet areas in Bangladesh, and the northern side, it goes even up to Sibsagar and so on. So it was one of the power centers or as a kingdom. But you know, it will find itself in a particular journey. So I'll just cut a long story short briefly so that you also sense the evolution of politics in South Asia, which later on will give rise to India and Pakistan as well. So we can divide this story in two senses. First is to realize that although Manipur has been there as an old kingdom like this, the power dynamics started changing in mid-18th century. So in 1752, one warlord called Alumpaya established a dynasty which later on became a big empire to rule Burma, now called Myanmar. So it began, he took charge in 1752. Please mark this date, 1752. On the other hand, the British, who came to this part of the world to do business by taking permission from the rulers in India, became a military and political power, and that event assertion came in 1757, 5 years after Alumpaya took over in Burma. What is this, 1757? It's the Battle of Plassey, where the East India Company, for the first time, became a ruler of an area in South Asia. Before that, they were doing business. So you can see that this British political power ruler and then Burma under Alumpaya, they grow steadily. And then within 60 years, they confronted at the turn of the 19th century, 18th century, 1800 onwards. That is where we need to know it. That's how Manipur was caught in between. So this transformation, as it grows from 1750 to this side in the eastern side in 1757, that Manipuri rulers were aware of this rising power, and therefore the ruler tried to negotiate with this newfound situation, and one of the classic maneuver was a treaty signed on behalf of Maharaja Gorasham and the British East India Company's Chittagong factory chief, personally, which is 1762, 14th of September. So you can see this is the dynamics in the mid-18th century. This dynamics Manipur was aware of. Interestingly, Alumpaya, it is said by the Burmese historians that at the age of 9, he saw how the Manipuris had raided his village and ransacked them. So he thought that first task in his agenda is to punish Manipur once he took over. So he unified the southern Burma in 1756-57, and the first task after that, he handed over the power to look after the southern Burma, which is part Yangon and all this area, and he came to Manipur to punish. That was the first Burmese incursions. That was before Enhancement and all of that. This was the later part of the 18th century itself. Now what happened is that you will see that as these two empires grows, they are bound to confront. And that confrontation started with what is called the First Anglo-Burmese War, 1824 and 1826. But before that, you must know that that war was occasioned by the intrusion of Burmese Empire in today's India's northeast. Assam and Manipur was threatened by the Burma. In fact, the Burmese king had put some puppet king in Manipur, and so much so that in 1819 began a period in Manipur history which is known as Enhancement, devastation where the people were being thrown, and it was put as a sort of a puppet vassal state by the Burmese. And along with this First Anglo-Burmese War, Gandhi Singh took part in it, and it was liberated. That's the relationship that we started with the British after 1826. Treaty of Yandabo was the turning point. And here is the